Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The Canadian dollar is at its lowest point in years. We'll hear what's behind the plunge and ask you, what does the low loonie mean for your wallet? From cross-border shopping to the price of produce to snowbirds flying south, we want to hear from you. After 12:30, the Canadian Mental Health Association is calling for expanded public coverage of mental health services. Should more of those services like counseling be free to more people? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. The Canadian loonie is trading against the US dollar at its lowest level in 5 years, around the 70-cent mark. And that is causing people to rethink how they're shopping and traveling. And it's causing questions as well as to how we got here. It may impact whether you travel south. Perhaps the U.S. is not one of your destinations this holiday. We want to hear from you. What is the low Canadian dollar exchange doing for your cross-border shopping habits? What impact will it have on your wallet this Christmas season? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining me now is Rahim Madhavji, president of Knightsbridge Foreign Exchange, Inc. Hello, Rahim. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So the loonie, I just checked, I think it was at 72 cents just before I came on air. What are the causes for this weak performance against the US dollar?
Sure. So there's a couple of causes. Largely, it's driven by the economics divergence between Canada and the United States. So the Bank of Canada has been lowering rates recently, much so at a faster pace than of the United States. That lowering of interest rates is causing money to move from Canada into the United States because the interest rates are higher. So the flow of funds are moving from Canada into the United States. That is causing the loonie to drop. The ultimate reason for this is because the Canadian economy is not performing as well. Economic-wise, job-wise, we've got commodity prices also lower, oil prices are off their highs. All of that is compounding into a weaker loonie.
Okay, so what does that mean for Canadians? What are some of the impacts of that?
Sure. So right now, our phones are ringing off the hook, largely because there's a lot of people that have US dollars, either from inheritance or they're earning US dollars, and they're converting it to Canadian because they're seeing that $1.40 level. It's a psychological level, and they're converting it from US to Canadian. That being said, Canadians who have children who are studying in the United States, going to medical school abroad, they are cringing when they need to make these tuition payments. So they are not happy that the price of the loonie has fallen so low. Others, snowbirds, also are a big clientele of ours, and they're also traveling to the United States and making those types of arrangements. They're also not happy. So anyone traveling to the US, going to school abroad, anyone with fixed payments, importing, you're starting to also see grocery stores move away from domestic imports from within Canada of groceries to those that are abroad.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that also, obviously that pricing is going to flow right through the grocery stores here.
All of them cringing, as you say. So what does that mean? Let's talk about the grocery stores, because that's something that affects just about everyone. You're right. A lot of produce comes from California. What does it mean when you import so many of your products from the United States? How does that then translate to the prices we see in the grocery aisles?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's not going to be a good next couple of months. Basically, the Canadian climate can't produce everything. That's just a reality of where we are. As a result, we need to import stuff from different places, California, for example, and other parts of the U.S. where the climate is better, and we're getting a lot of our groceries from there. As a result, these grocery stores need to make purchases now or in the next couple of months at prices now or in the next couple of months. And the dollar is also at the price now or the next couple of months. So we'll see a little bit of a lagging effect. I think generally this lag can take a couple of months for it to get priced in fully. So there is a little bit of a lag that'll happen before you'll start to notice it. But at the end of the day, Canada just doesn't make a lot of stuff that Canadians consume. And as a result, anything that we're buying, whether it comes from China or, for example, grocery stores when it's coming from, largely the United States or Mexico, um, that is going to trickle through right to the bottom line. These grocery stores have to have it as their cost basis, and they need to increase that markup that goes on to Canadians. So you're going to start to see a lot of the when the inventory starts to get replaced at these grocery stores, prices start to trickle a little bit and a little bit higher. It's not going to be good news over the next couple of months.
My guest is Rahim Madhavji, president of Knightsbridge Foreign Exchange Inc. And we are asking you, in light of the low loonie right now, the lowest it's been in years, what impact will that have on you? Whether you are a snowbird who travels down to the United States, if you have kids going to school there, if you plan to do some holiday shopping, is this going to affect your cross-border shopping habits? Does it make you want to stay home even more than usual in terms of where you spend your money? And how will this impact your wallet this holiday season? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And Rahim, we're getting some of the upside to this on our email because, of course, this probably means good news for tourism that is hoping for those U.S. visitors. And Elizabeth writes from Richmond, not all is lost when our dollar falls lower than the U.S. dollar. This makes us a much more attractive destination for Americans, which means more money spent in our country. There is an upside. So let's take a look at what that means for businesses relying on American visitors. What do you think, Rain?
So absolutely, there are winners and losers depending on who you talk to. And as I mentioned, we're getting a lot more calls of people that have U.S. dollars and they're exchanging it to Canadian. And tourism is a great example. If you're part of the film industry, all of a sudden you're starting to look a lot more attractive than you were, several months ago in terms of a film studio trying to, do some activities here all across Canada. If you are part of the ski sector, out in BC, you're starting to probably see a lot more phone calls as an alternative to come to Canada to enjoy what Canada has to offer versus, other, say, for example, other parts of the U.S. or other parts of the world. So a weak loonie basically has the factor of boosting the economy from the perspective of selling Canadian goods abroad. So tourism, for example, is a good part of it. And, the film studios, for example, anything that Canada makes and can sell, generally bodes well. So that's correct. And not all is lost.
More of those Hallmark movies in the Fraser Valley. As we know, a lot of them are filmed here in BC. Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone, asking you, what does a low loonie mean for you? Is it good news or bad news? Let us know. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And again, pound 690. You can email us to bctoday@cbc.ca. And Aaron writes us, I invest based on the USD, primarily in cryptocurrency. When the Canadian dollar drops, my investments rise. Hedging against the economy is the way to go for me. So, as you were talking about, and as I've been reading, depending on the increase in the economy in the United States, more people pump their money there or invest in American dollars. What does this mean for investors?
Sure. So if you had invested in U.S. dollars prior to it rising, of course, you're going to be quite happy with the U.S. dollar rising, right? So you've
Sure.
basically insulated yourself, whereas, that person mentioned, they've benefited and insulated, hedged themselves against that. Now, if you're strictly in Canadian dollars, then you've obviously, partially missed that boat. If you're looking at investing in, for example, the U.S. stock market, whether it's ETFs or mutual funds, a lot of those are obviously priced in U.S. dollars, and you're basically paying that premium, right? Our currency gets devalued because it's trying to attract investment into Canada. When you are investing outside of Canada, let's say in the S&P 500 ETF, you're moving money from Canada to the U.S. You've got to pay the going rate, and you're basically paying a premium as a result of it. So, as Canadians, for example, when it comes to investing, generally people should be generally somewhat diversified, perhaps not all in Canada in terms of their equity investments. So if you do have some investments in the S&P 500, from prior investments, you've obviously benefited from rising Loonie. A lot of the pension funds are very, very well diversified. For example, the CPP pension fund, I'm sure they've got a ton of investments in the U.S. and, of course, in the U.S. dollar, and they've obviously benefited from uh, um, a rising U.S. dollar, and that benefits the CPP and benefits all Canadians. So when it looks to investing, there's obviously these cyclical flows where the dollar goes up, and we're basically at 140 today. In 2008, we were at par, and it's almost everyone's basically forgotten that. So it moves in a lot of cycles up and down. I think generally people want to be well diversified, but people care about what are the costs in Canadian dollars that they need to live. What do they need to
For
pay at the
daily
grocery store?
expenses, yeah. Hmm.
The daily expenses, and everything else is kind of just gravy. When you've got for example, crypto going up, and it's also in U.S. dollars. You've got U.S. investments that are also in U.S. dollars, but it just goes to show it pays to be well diversified, so you can benefit one way or the other. You're not always calling the shots. You're not taking all the risk all across the board on your investments.
Alex, thank you very much for that email. And speaking of cryptocurrency, that did get a bump after Donald Trump was elected in the United States for a second time. What impact does that have on the dollar value? He's also promising to be more protectionist and introducing tariffs. So what impact does that have on the U.S. dollar?
Sure. So we've seen prior to President Trump getting elected, the U.S. dollar start to rise, and then post-election, we saw it rise even further. And the reason for that is there are people that believe that this will be, an age of exceptionalism for the U.S. in terms of the economy, deregulation, and that is going to just, create a humming economy in the U.S. On the flip side, we've also got the threat of tariffs. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty around it. How high is it going to be? When is it going to take into effect? What industries are going to be impacted? Whenever there's uncertainty in Canada or investment in general, people flock to the US dollar as a safe haven currency. So the threat of these Trump tariffs don't bode well for the loonie. I believe it's going to be an overhang on the loonie until we get clarity on it. And it could be some time before we get clarity on it. And Canada generally isn't in, I would say, a good negotiating position when we're talking about tariffs. So it's hard to see us renegotiate, tariff agreements and come out on top. We feel like we're probably going to be somewhat of a net loser, perhaps, and it's just how much damage are we going to contain? That uncertainty doesn't bode well for, obviously for the Canadian dollar. So tariffs have played a pretty big role, even though they haven't been implemented. The threat of them being implemented is just, causing investment away from Canada. Why would you want to invest in Canada if you don't know what the tariffs are going to be a year from now?
Anne writes us an email. This is actually a good thing for Canada. More local shopping. Less flying is good for climate change. Less food out of season. Good for climate change. I celebrate the low loonie. Thank you very much, Anne. Yes, there's the good news and the bad news, the winners and the losers. Let's take another call here now, or a call from Angela in Vancouver. Hi, Angela. Welcome.
Oh, hello. How are you?
I am fine. How are you doing? How are you feeling about the loonie?
I think it always just depends on what's going on in your life at the time.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
in my case, there's a lot of positives. So, if you're someone who works in the U.S. or gets paid in U.S. funds, the lower the dollar, the more money you make.
Sure.
So that's always a benefit. Now, I used to work in the U.S. I used to live on a border city, and when that happened, I was excited. We have family that are in that situation, and they're excited. What I would add to that also is we have family out east who work in the automotive industry, and their vehicles are sold, to the U.S. and they want to see that dollar low from a job protection standpoint. We've had friends who had purchased property in the U.S. when the dollar was high, when the Canadian dollar was higher, and then sold it some years ago when the dollar dropped at a profit and were able to buy their first home in the Vancouver area. In our
Wow,
family,
that's a
we
big
have
deal.
people.
That's just
Think about it, right?
yeah.
And then we have family who have whose mortgage is coming up for renewal next year, and so that lower mortgage interest rate is a big deal. Like for people who have 5-year fixed. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just showing the other side.
No, we appreciate that. What about for you? You said, it kind of depends on what's going on in your life at the moment. So any impact on you?
For myself personally, right now, not too much. I mean, I like the idea of shopping locally, and so I guess that would be an impact. It just makes Canadian goods a little bit more attractive. I mean, I'm not really too concerned about it. It's not having any kind of negative impact on me. Of course, I do wonder about what, a low Canadian dollar means over the long run in terms of our ability to compete around the world and all of that kind of stuff. But, in terms of these specific circumstances that have hit our family in the past and are going to hit our family right now, it's pretty much all good.
You've told us a lot of scenarios through your family. So thank you to you and your relatives. Angela, thanks so much. Good to hear from you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Take care. That's Angela in Vancouver. Douglas writes, if you're online shopping, make sure to check the price. If it's USD or Canadian dollars, yes, definitely. I saved 15% on Christmas presents just this morning because the price in Canadian dollars was way worse than the price in US dollars. So that was even after the exchange rate. So doing your own math and getting a Canadian bank to do the exchange, well worth the savings. It may seem many companies build a huge margin on exchange rates that may be possible to avoid. So everyone needs help saving money this Christmas season. Hope this helps save Canadians some cash, checking whether the prices are in USD or CAD. Douglas, thank you very much. Rahim, what does this mean then, do you think, for the holiday season coming up?
Well, I think Angela made some great points. Shopping and buying locally is going to be an attractive alternative. Traveling locally, for example, a lot of people will do some more price comparison between Canadian and US dollars. Those that import products also have a lag. So I remember one of the examples from several years ago, and it's probably a good time to update it now, but if you're looking to purchase a new iPhone, you can look at the US dollar price and the Canadian price, for example, of the iPhone and try to do a comparison on which one is actually cheaper. And because Apple doesn't update their prices every day and the Canadian dollar price changes every day, sometimes you can also find a benefit in going to one place or the other on what you want to buy, just because the websites are slow to update their pricing. They might update it, half a year or every quarter. You might be able to find some deals that way. So those were some interesting observations. And then also being across, as Angela mentioned, people in the border towns might come into Canada and spend some of that money locally. They might come to some restaurants or come over the weekend and spend some of those dollars here. So there's obviously a boost over here. I think over the holidays, there's obviously a lot of money being spent on presents and gifts and kids' toys. So you want to really kind of shop around and make sure that, you're getting the best bang for your buck, and maybe do a comparison between Canadian and US prices. And if you're close to the border, and the prices haven't changed that much, then you might want to move one way or the other. But it's most likely you're going to probably find better prices locally, because the Canadian businesses are probably slow to have increased their prices because of the weakness in the loonie. So they're probably a little bit behind.
You can take advantage of that lag. Rahim, really good to have you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Rahim Adhavji is president of Knightsbridge Foreign Exchange Inc. It's 12:25 now. This is BC Today. Well, speaking of spending, the Liberal government is proposing a break on the GST on some items, including children's clothes and toys, prepared food and snacks, restaurant meals, and Christmas trees. It's also promising a $250 rebate next spring for people who made up to $150,000 last year. Well, Cynthia wrote us, and she writes, I think it behooves us to help those in need. The $250 may not mean much to a well-off person, but if it helps anyone in need, I'm thrilled. I sometimes wonder if partisan dislike of a leader colors our judgments, as everyone has been complaining about the government to do something to give immediate relief, and now they have, they're vilified. People who consider this a bribe need to remember Scott Moe and David Eby promising $500 to each home. Erin O'Toole promised $200 in the last election. Doug Ford, the same thing. No government is perfect, but our country stands high among the G7 for economic growth and general well-being. Cynthia, thank you. And we also talked about social media on the show as thousands leave users leave X to another platform like Blue Sky. David wrote, I deleted my Facebook back in the early 2000s. I've never had Twitter, been on Instagram or any other platform, and I'm happy with that decision. It occurred to me that information is power. If you go into a very public space like the internet and post all kinds of details about your private life, then anyone who has it in for you can aggregate that data, use it against you. Now, you had guests on your show recommending the alternative, like Blue Sky or Threads or Mastodon. It's just swapping out one dangerous addiction for another. It doesn't matter whether you post all your data to Blue Sky or to Twitter, you're still exposing your data. Get off social media. If you want to connect with people, go to a cafe and socialize face to face. You're better off offline. Thanks for your emails, bctoday@cbc.ca. .27 now, and Make the Season Kind is the new name for our annual CBC British Columbia fundraiser in support of food banks. We have a special day of programming planned for Friday, December the 6th, all designed to support the 108 food banks in this province. Here's a story of one man who's turned to the food bank.
My name is Brian. I'm 57, and I'm on permanent disability. It's hard to make it as it is these days, and with the rate the way rents are and the price of food, there's not a lot left over at the end for groceries. The food bank's been an invaluable asset to my life, for sure. I made signs for 35 years, and then I've been working as a contractor off and on, so I still work now and then. Disability allows you to make a certain amount of income before they take it away from what you're getting, but I had some mental problems that I had to deal with that have caused me to not be able to carry on full-time employment. When I get stressed out, things kind of go south for me, so that's why I'm on disability. So I live a fairly normal life, but I just really count on the support of the government, support of the food bank, things like that. I'm trying to get into social housing right now, just as anything will help. We're paying $2,500 a month for rent is impossible when you're making $1,400 a month on disability, right? It just doesn't add up. One of my roommates had suggested the food bank, and I just called them up, and they asked me to come in for an interview, right? And they were very friendly and very helpful. I didn't feel uncomfortable at all. It didn't feel like I was being judged. I just felt like they were happy to help. I smiled the whole day. And they put me through the line right away, and I've never felt uncomfortable going there or shameful or anything like that, right? It's been a very caring environment for sure. Like you'll get tomato sauce or whatever, and they'll give you everything you need for spaghetti. And when they give out the vegetables and stuff like that, I get whatever I can, because I love cooking. So, I'll take the extra peppers or whatever, and I'll just pickle them or freeze stuff or whatever, and try to make the best of it. And kindness to me means being excellent to each other, right? And I don't think that there is enough of that in the world. The church used to be a very important part of people's lives. Most people went to church every Sunday, and it was part of the community, and if somebody was down, the people in their congregation or whatever would usually rally around, and the empathy that people have for each other just doesn't seem to be there like it used to be. I say that the world has contempathy now. It's like you should care, but you don't. And I think that everybody needs to take a pause and think about everybody else instead of just themselves once in a while. I think that everybody has a little bit of kindness in them, and it's just a matter of leading by example, I guess.
Many thanks to Brian for sharing his story. Friday, December the 6th, is the 38th annual CBC British Columbia special day of programming in support of food banks around the province. The campaign is called Make the Season Kind. You can go to cbc.ca/kindbc, where you'll find the Donate Now button. If you click on that, you'll see a drop-down menu, and you can choose to donate to any one of the 108 food banks in BC. Once again, it's cbc.ca/kindbc. Click on Donate Now, and after your donation, you do receive a tax receipt within a few hours. Really looking forward to Friday, December the 6th. It's 12:31 now. Coming up in our next half hour, we're going to talk about mental health care and a renewed call to include more of those services in the public health care system. We'll talk about that coming up after the CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The Canada Border Services Agency says it has seized more than 200 bricks of cocaine at Lower Mainland crossings over the past month or so. The 3 seizures took place at the Pacific Highway and Aldergrove commercial points of entry. The CVSA says the drugs were found in commercial trucks and the drivers have been arrested. The agency says the bricks weighed about 240 kilograms and have a street value of more than $6.5 million. A quick note for drivers, Highway 3 will be closed for avalanche work from 2 to 4 this afternoon at the Salmo Creston Highway Summit. No detour will be available. In international news, there are reports of a possible ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. We will have more details when they become available. And a marine mammal researcher has identified the pod of orcas seen in False Creek this weekend. Andrew Treit says the killer whales included a 26-year-old transient and her 3 calves. He says the animals likely found their way into the harbor to hunt seals. Granville Island Ferries posted video yesterday showing the family of 4 whales swimming by a shuttle back toward open waters. And now the forecast on the North Coast, mainly sunny this afternoon with a high of 1. Highs around -20 with sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, partly cloudy with a high of 14. Highs from 0 to 4 with rain and wet snow in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a chance of showers or flurries with a high of 2. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, rain tapering off, then cloudy with highs around 7. That's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
And a very happy Mariah Carey season to those who celebrate. It is.
Is that the beginning? Is it the beginning of this?
It's time.
Fantastic.
It's time. She's making her appearance.
Great.
You sound very excited.
Yeah.
I did.
I'll try to avoid Costco.
You try.
Yeah. Is this
That's
so what,
versus
is this a
me
thing?
dancing in the aisles,
Yeah.
because once I hear it, I get very excited.
Great.
I mean, I have to say, are you seeing lots of decorations already around your neighborhood?
Quite a few.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Have you seen the Christmas tree outside the post office building?
I have not.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Oh,
It's
my-
really cool blue modern Christmas tree.
Like a piece of public art.
Yeah, it is. It's awesome.
I'm gonna go check it out. I'm seeing a few here.
You could
and
turn
there.
around actually and see it right now.
And how come I haven't seen it? This is.
I don't know.
I just
You
work
should pay
too hard,
attention,
Rob.
Michelle.
I should
Yes.
maybe
Yeah.
use my powers of observation.
Yes, you should.
Okay, I'm gonna turn around. I don't see anything, but I will report back to you.
Keep looking.
Keep looking. I do have a show to do right now.
Yes, all
But
right.
anyway, I was going to tell you all about my decorating, my
Let's
my
save it for
living room.
tomorrow, or let's save it for the 24th.
No, that is too long. I plan to play you Mariah Carey every day until then.
That's super.
Yeah. Rob, thank you.
Sure.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Yes, I already have decorated my living room. I don't know if you have, but it was really fun, I have to say. I'm going to check out that Canada Post tree after the show for sure. But let me know if you've already decorated your home too. The spirit is alive and well in my household. $12:35 now. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, consider this question. We aren't expected to pay for life-saving cancer care, so why are we paying for life-saving mental health care? That question comes from the Canadian Mental Health Association, which released a report on the state of mental health in Canada last week. Now, the CMHA found mental health care services like counseling are often only available to those who can afford it, making cost a big barrier. They're calling for legislation to make more services like counseling, psychotherapy, and peer support part of the universal healthcare system. We'll be joined by the CMHA in a moment, and we're asking you, should mental health services be free under the universal healthcare system? Has it been a cost and a barrier for you? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm joined now by Johnny Morris, the CEO of the CMHA in BC. Johnny, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me back, Michelle. Thank you.
How much of a barrier is cost when it comes to accessing some mental health services?
It's a huge barrier for countless folks across this province and the country. A number of folks are lucky enough to have mental health benefits as part of their extended health plan if they have an employer. Often that's not enough, though. It's $500. So if you meet your counselor and you don't quite like them, you've used up half of your benefit already. And for many folks, they don't have access to those plans. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're self-employed, if you're out of work. So we do have like a 2 or 3 tier system when it comes to people being able to afford what we would argue should be universally funded, should be free at source when it comes to mental health and well-being care.
And what's your sense of the need out there for services, and for what services specifically?
Well, the need is great. Our national report came out last week. 10 million Canadians currently reporting that their mental health is poor or fair, which means different things to different people. It's 3 times more than we saw before the pandemic. And what we do know is if we get to people quickly enough with counseling and therapy in and around things like depression and anxiety and other mental health problems, we can really do a great deal in avoiding crisis from occurring in the first place. We know that early intervention and prevention really works. Mental health problems are very, very treatable with the right kind of care. It could be cognitive behavioral therapy or other forms of therapy. They're really, really effective. And it really, really is. It can be devastating to not be able to access that kind of care in a timely way.
And here in BC, there is the impact of that. I would imagine we see, you talk about crises. We see the impact of the overdose crisis here.
Yes, I mean, BC in lots of ways has been a trailblazer in getting us the closest we've ever been to publicly funded mental health care. A number of years ago, the government funded millions of dollars in community counseling grants, which are still underway. We stayed quite close to that initiative, and the data shows that there are so many people who wouldn't have been able to see a counselor before, who have now and have reported that these services have helped them in a timely way. It's avoided crisis. But you're right. I mean, in many ways, in the recent election, over the past number of years, crisis has been top of mind, and we're close, and we're encouraged by some of the commitments that we've seen made. We're wondering if we can get even closer to seeing mental health care here be publicly funded in a way that's truly accessible to as many people across the province as possible.
Perhaps you can dig into the specifics of that. What does the Canada Health Act say about mental health care, and what changes do you want to see?
Well, we kind of know this in the context of, for example, massage care or dental care until recently. There are certain kinds of care that are excluded from the funding envelope that the feds send into the provinces and territories. And without getting into the law completely, there's only particular kinds of mental health funding, particularly care provided in hospitals by doctors, like psychiatrists, that are protected under law in this country. And so we've called upon the federal government through our national office for some time to do similarly to what they've done to dental care. So now there's publicly funded dental care in Canada. that's means tested. There's been some movement towards pharmacare. We've urged the federal government to do what they can to support publicly funded mental health care in a similar way. Short of opening up the Canada Health Act and all that would come with that, we've really encouraged the national government to contemplate putting into force legislation that would compel provinces to spend in particular ways, but could in some ways protect this funding for publicly funded counseling that people could access through their provincial health insurance like MSP. So we've been really urging the federal government to do that. And we recognize that provincial governments have a role to play. Nova Scotia being one of the first jurisdictions in this country recently who have embraced publicly funded counseling very recently. We're hoping BC might be next in some shape or form.
Okay, and I'd like to ask you about that, the role of the BC government. I did reach out to the office of the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, the federal minister, this morning, and they said on this call to expand coverage and to cover all mental health services or more mental health services, that they do point to provinces and territories as the primary deliverers of healthcare. They want to work with them to ensure Canadians get the supports they need, and they point to their what they call historic investments of over $200 billion over the next 10 years and these bilateral agreements. Mm-hmm. And so for BC, that amounted to $3.3 billion over 10 years. This was an agreement last year. And part of that was to improve mental health and substance use services for British Columbians. Do you see that surfacing as a result of this funding?
I've been on record, Michelle, during the tenure of the recently separate Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. There absolutely have been some real gains made in the zone of mental health care. I've been on record saying we've seen some of the most historic investments here in British Columbia. One of those examples being the community counseling grants program that I mentioned. But the key issue there is not everyone can access that, and it isn't enough. So in BC, as I said, I think we're the closest. We're on the cusp in and around publicly funded counseling, and a number of those investments, particularly in the first transfer from the federal government, have absolutely manifested in improved services and improved care in the mental health space, and I think those stories are really important to tell. We were heartened so the NDP have taken power here in BC. We were heartened to see in their platform a commitment to what they've identified as a $50 million community resiliency fund, which we're hopeful could manifest in increased access to counseling for those who don't have an employer plan or who don't have access to benefits. So more people could get 2 counselors at the right time, provided we have enough counselors to provide that service.
There's that issue, isn't there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Get more into that if you'd like.
The number of counselors available, we know that there, even with funding or with extended benefits, there is a wait to see therapists. But I want to ask you, you mentioned that the Mental Health and Addictions Ministry here in BC, in the recent cabinet announcement, that's been folded back into the Health Ministry. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, at first, of course, we were shocked. I mean, those things happened suddenly, right? So we were shocked, Michelle, and concerned, and I do think it's really important to acknowledge the changes that did happen whilst that ministry did exist, and we're being pragmatic about it too, in that there's a really important opportunity. To me, that's a signal from government that they're wanting to integrate and put mental health on the same footing as physical health care. And so if that's the cascade of priorities, there's lots and lots of ways to make sure that mental health and substance use care are treated in a parallel sense of priority as physical health care. Thinking about the role of psychologists, Dr. Leslie Lutz out at UBC has campaigned tirelessly for psychologists to be more readily available in the context of primary care. So docs don't have to figure this out all on their own. They can actually refer to a very qualified person to help with, more significant and severe symptoms of mental health problems. The BC Association of Clinical Counsellors championed for a long time, and we were really encouraged to see this. Counsellors getting regulated, so they'll be paid for by more insurance plans. And when you go and see a counsellor, you truly know you're seeing a quality professional that's been regulated and vetted. These are the key ingredients for change that the government has moved forward. So we're reading this as an important signal. Absolutely, having a standalone cabinet minister fighting for these issues was absolutely incredibly welcome and needed. Now with the integration with Minister Osborne's mandate, we're really hoping that all these very complex worlds in a really big ministry can be held in a way that mental health does not get left behind. You and I know it's been left behind for so long. We're the furthest ahead we've been for some time on mental health care. How do we keep that momentum up and not lose that change that we've experienced?
You'll be keeping a close eye on that ministry, I'm sure. My guest, Johnny Morris, the CEO of the Canadian Mental Health Association's BC division, asking you, do you think that more mental health care services should be free and covered under the universal healthcare system? Some, as you've heard, counseling, psychotherapy are not. And so the CMHA says that leads to barriers for people who can't afford it. So we're asking you for your thoughts. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And Joanne is on the line in Victoria. Hi, Joanne. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. How are you feeling?
Hi. Oh, I'm feeling good. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about this need, the call for expansion of the Canada Health Act for mental health?
Speaking from a personal perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense to have it publicly funded. I think my family and I are in a situation right now. I'm a single mom and living in Victoria, as we all know, cost of living. And I've recently been laid off. My son, who's 15, has had a history of what I would say mental health. We've been concerned, but he's just recently opened up and wants to talk about it and is admitting that he's having struggles. He's feeling depression. He's feeling anxiety. And I immediately grabbed onto that and was like, let's go to therapy, which we had tried for him over the last few years, but he wouldn't open up. He just has this amazing facade. So we immediately started therapy, and I found out that my current employer at the time didn't cover therapy, which was a first. Even if it had, it would only be $500. So that's 5 sessions.
Right.
And then now that I'm laid off, I'm entirely paying out of pocket. And in a crisis situation, you need more than once a month. You can't just check in once a month. So that's a lot of money going out every week or 2 weeks. And having it publicly funded, at least subsidized in some way, would allow our family to continue this really helpful therapy. Whereas right now, I'm just stretching it as much as I can until there's no more money.
Oh my goodness, Joanne. I mean, just kudos to you for taking action straight away as soon as your son started opening up to you.
Yeah,
But that's a
absolutely.
cost. That's a cost for sure. Well, thank you very much. And as you pointed out, it's not linear in terms of what you were talking about in seeking help and what kind of
No,
therapy works. And so that must be adding to your stress as well.
No, it's just we need to have access to this support when it's necessary. There's so many people that don't even have extended benefits, and that it's not affordable, but it's really important.
Joanne, I wish you all the best, and your 15-year-old
you.
as well. He's got a good mom.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you. That's Joanne in Victoria. Yeah. Johnny, her personal situation, her personal story is just so indicative of what you've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I just hold up my hands to Joanne's courage in coming onto live radio and sharing her story as a mom and the story of her child as well. And invite Joanne to reach out to us at CMHA at our provincial office, and we can help do some navigation too, because there are services that are available. The challenge here, of course, Joanne and her son have found a great connection with a therapist, right? So there's this great work underway. And money is the limiting factor here. There are other services, of course, that are great. Foundry being one of them. You know, we have a program for young people with depression and anxiety. But once you found that relationship, We hear from countless people that they can't afford to see that person anymore for similar reasons to what Joanne described, and that can sometimes be the end of a really, really powerful therapeutic alliance with a counselor. So really invite Joanne to reach out to us at Canadian Mental Health BC Division, and we can see if we can support.
Joanne, thank you again. I wish you all the best. Tracy is our next caller now in Vancouver. Hi, Tracy.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a little bit of a trouble speaking, so I apologize for that. I have a double view. I was a public health nurse in the schools for a number of years, and when I first started, I put a manila paper in all of the staff rooms and asked them, what do you think is the biggest health concern for the children in your classes? And that was for all the staff. And I worked in public schools and private schools from kindergarten to grade 12. And every single teacher and support person put stress and anxiety. And we kept trying to say, push the concern up the line and come up with mental health resources of our own that we could use in the schools. But the message was never getting there. And then later on, suddenly there was all these kids who were acutely ill and wanting to get into the hospitals. And I think counseling is an important part of upstream because our psychiatrists are overwhelmed. They have huge, long waiting lists. And I know psychiatrists for adults won't even see people now for talk therapy because they are so besieged that it's their medication ability. So once you are given the best support medically and they think you're on the best meds possible, you are discharged. And if you are medication resistant, you're also discharged and asked to go to talk therapy, which is now no longer covered. And I think part of my concern with kids is I would see kids with parents who are unable to afford counseling or any kind of upstream. We had to wait for a crisis, but who wants a kid to go into crisis or have something that might have been able to be solved just by giving them some tools or even just better environments, more community centers, better programming in schools, cheaper activities that kids could get involved in.
Looking at it holistically.
Yes, it is. It's all about. It's all about creating a healthy environment for people. And I worry when I see all these. We're being packed into these huge apartment buildings right next to the busiest roads with no park space, and it's just so noisy. But I also am currently on disability with mental health issues. And I've gone and they've got me on the best medication regime they think they can come up with it because I am unfortunately medication resistant. And I'm fortunate in that I do still receive 70% of my salary. So I can put this towards counseling. But most people who are on straight disability only receive $1,200 a month. And I can tell you, I am only seeing an RCC, and I'm only seeing her twice a month. And it probably
a registered clinical counselor, yeah.
Yes, it's $400 a month for me out of pocket, and at least, and just for an hour and a half session twice a month.
Wow. Tracy, and, I'm sorry, I have to jump in just for time here, and I do apologize. Thank you for those very relevant points that you've made. Interesting to hear about youth and what the needs are with prevention there, and your personal situation as well. Thank you so much for sharing that when it comes to disability income. I'll just wrap up here with Johnny Morris. So we've heard the arguments and the calls for why this would be important for people and their lives. In terms of the economy, how would you justify that cost to people and say this is something that you feel is worth it to include mental health in the public healthcare system, Johnny?
Well, we've heard the Premier, as he's built his cabinet, kind of state the very pressing priorities for his newest Minister of Health, and those priorities have been around for a while. Investing here absolutely reduces downward pressures elsewhere in the health system. So we have a primary care doctor attachment issue. Not all of us have a doctor, right, in BC. Doctors play such a key role here, but if we can offset the pressure, and we do this with a number of our programs from doctors doing all of that work that they do as GPs, plus being mental health therapists, if we can reduce pressure there, I think that has huge implications for the challenge that Minister Osborne's been set in and around making sure more of us are attached to a GP. Gracie, I think that was the name of the last caller, talked about crisis and the pressure in emergency rooms. The more that we can do to keep people out of the emergency room in crisis because they've been treated earlier upstream, or there are other resources separate from emergency rooms, is a game changer in many ways. One of our services has responded to thousands of crisis calls, the PAC teams that the government has funded. We've only needed to involve emergency services 1% of the time. So those teams pay for themselves inevitably because we keep people in community-based care and out of that cycle of crisis that Gracie described so eloquently. So I think the economic argument's really there. We currently pay for mental health care in some of the most expensive ways possible, emergency rooms, psychiatrists, et cetera. What would it look like with some investment to really get to people, as both of your callers described, early on so that we avoid crisis? I think the economic argument is sound.
Johnny, always good to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Michelle, thanks for your wonderful questions. Hope to connect with you again soon. Thank you.
Take care. Johnny Morris, the CEO of the Canadian Mental Health Association in BC. Trudy wrote us, I'm self-employed. I pay into an extended health care plan, but the coverage for counseling is very poor, only $25 per visit. My counselor charges $136. I simply cannot afford this, so I've had to stop seeing my counselor. I'm excited at the ideas your guest is putting forward. Thank you for your email.